Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Wednesday, 6th August 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. Australia. Queensland faces criticism as its deforestation rates remain high, with over 332,015 hectares cleared in 2022 to 23, leading conservationists to call it the deforestation capital of Australia. A significant portion of this clearing occurred in Great Barrier Reef catchment areas, threatening endangered species and intensifying climate change. Jobs and skills. Australia reported a gender pay gap, with men earning more than women in 98% of occupations. After a decade, women typically earn 70 cents for every dollar earned by men, a gap widening to nearly 40% for First Nations women. The Great Barrier Reef has experienced its greatest annual loss of live coral in 39 years. The U.S. is deploying its Dark Eagle hypersonic missile to Australia's Northern Territory, strengthening Allied deterrence against China as part of the Talisman Sabre exercise. United States. President Donald Trump has implemented new reciprocal tariffs, raising export levies for numerous countries. Treasury Secretary lauded a manufacturing renaissance resulting from these tariffs, while Apple plans to invest an additional $100 billion in US manufacturing over the next 4 years. Apple CEO Tim Cook previously warned that the tariffs could cost the company up to $900 million per fiscal quarter. Trump is also using tariffs to pressure India to cease oil purchases from Russia. Trump warned of a potential federal takeover of Washington, D.C., citing crime problems. The White House is preparing to implement secondary sanctions on Russia. The Fort Bliss Army Base will open Camp East Montana on August 17 to house 1,000 immigrant detainees, with plans to expand to 5,000 beds. Human Rights Watch reported that as arms were used in unlawful, indiscriminate Israeli attacks that killed Palestinian civilians. The White House's apparent decision to block Taiwanese leader William Lai Ching-te's transit through New York has sparked backlash from Democrats, but met with relative silence from Republicans. Russia. President Vladimir Putin stated he is not yet ready to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, citing the need for specific conditions. Preparations are underway for a bilateral summit between Putin and US President Donald Trump next week, with the Kremlin dismissing talk of a three-way summit, as it was not discussed with Trump envoy Steve Witkoff. Trump has stated that everyone agrees this war must come to a close after Steve Witkoff met with Vladimir Putin. The U.S. is expected to implement secondary sanctions on Russia. China. A Chinese rocket launch that triggered loud explosions and panic in Palawan, Philippines, has drawn condemnation from Manila. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's office stresses the importance of fostering ties and engagement with China. The U.S. is deploying its Dark Eagle hypersonic missile to Australia's Northern Territory, strengthening Allied deterrence against China. South Korea and the U.S. will delay half of their coming field exercises under their annual joint military drills this summer, a move seen as a gesture to reduce friction with North Korea. The Alchi Freedom Shield. U.S. exercises will run from August 18 to 28, with 20 of the 40 scheduled field training components now postponed. The U.S. is expected to pressure South Korea for increased burden sharing of defense costs in an upcoming summit. Seoul's role in a potential Taiwan conflict is set to be excluded from the agenda. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's office stresses the importance of fostering ties and engagement with China. Taiwan. Taiwan's economy faces pressure following President Donald Trump's declaration to impose a 100% tariff on imported semiconductors unless companies establish operations in the U.S. A 20% tariff on Taiwanese goods already took effect, affecting machine tools, plastic goods, and agricultural export. The White House's apparent decision to block Taiwanese leader William Lai Ching-ti's transit through New York has sparked backlash from Democrats, but met with relative silence from Republicans. Lebanon. Under US pressure, Lebanon's government faces a choice between war with Israel or war at home with Hezbollah. The US has been pushing for the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah, with warnings that a second war with Israel could occur if Hezbollah's arms are not confiscated soon. Philippines. A Chinese rocket launch that triggered loud explosions and panic in Palawan, Philippines, has drawn condemnation from Manila. India. Donald Trump is using tariffs to pressure India to stop buying oil from Russia. Northern Mariana Islands. The Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, along with US and Japanese officials, held the 80th anniversary commemoration of the World War II atomic bombings on Wednesday. China is making strides in technology, including maglev trains, brain-computer interfaces, and space exploration. A prototype maglev train is in development, aiming for 600 kilometers h, with soundproofing to address tunnel boom issues. A technology roadmap aims for breakthroughs by 2027, particularly in brain-computer interfaces with advances in electrodes and chips. Pakistan is increasing its technological partnership with China, extending into space exploration, AI, and quantum computing. China's second quarter GDP exceeded expectations, though tariff deadlines create uncertainty. Progress in U.S.-China trade talks is easing market concerns. Trade between China and Russia reached $19.14 billion, up 8.7% from June. High-value added industries, such as biomedicine, saw increased economic contributions, boosted by capital inputs, according to a Cakeson index. Local audits have revealed misuse of government consumption subsidies, with millions improperly claimed. Credit rating agencies are advising investment managers on corporate debt assessments. Hong Kong stocks rose after strong July export data from China, raising economic hopes. The Buddhist regulator in China pledged stricter oversight after the scandal involving Shi Yongxin, the Shaolin Temple abbot, who is being investigated for financial and sexual misconduct. The Buddhist Association of China vowed further deepen the comprehensive and strict governance of religion after Xi's actions damaged its reputation. Protests erupted in a southwestern Chinese city over official indifference following an attack on a girl. Police repression and censorship added to the outrage. Taiwan cyber hackers are diligent in attacks on mainland Chinese targets, according to Zhe Hongyi, chairman of cybersecurity company Qihu 360. A genetic study in China found that cancerous tumors can sequester a newly evolved gene to fuel their growth. Researchers from Peking University and the Chinese Academy of Sciences, KS, examined de novo Gen, Deep Blue Aerospace, a Chinese rocket company, apparently failed another reusability test, jeopardizing its goal of landing China's first reusable rocket. Satellite images suggest an explosion at Deep Blue Aerospace's test site in Inner Mongolia. But Australia's Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong expressed concerns to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi about the targeted intimidation of exiled Hong Kong pro-democracy campaigners. This followed reports of offers to Australian neighbours of Hong Kong activists to inform on them for $203,000. In the United States, Donald Trump called for the resignation of Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan, citing conflicts of interest due to his ties to Chinese tech firms. US President Donald Trump also suggested China could face a 25% tariff over continued purchases of Russian oil. India is embroiled in escalating trade tensions with the United States, stemming from tariffs initially set at 25% by President Donald Trump and now potentially reaching 50%. But these tariffs are partly a consequence of India's ongoing trade with Russia in arms and energy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has vowed not to compromise the interests of Indian farmers in response to Trump's tariff policies. The government in Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir, led by Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha, has banned 25 books, including works by Arundhati Roy, alleging they promote secessionism in the disputed territory. India is also aligning with the US and Turkey in recognizing the interim leadership of Syria. In other news, flash flooding in northern India swept away the Himalayan village of Darali, tragically causing at least 4 deaths and trapping numerous people. Turning to the United States, President Donald Trump has levied tariffs on India, initially at 25% and with the potential to climb to 50%, citing India's continued trade with Russia, especially in oil and arms. Trump's actions appear to contradict previous strategies of positioning India as a counterweight to China, now labeling India a dead economy. Trump also criticized Apple and CEO Tim Cook for relocating iPhone production to India to evade tariffs planned for China, while simultaneously announcing a $100 billion investment in U.S. manufacturing by Apple. Trump is further tightening sanctions, loopholes to potentially impact global markets if India and China cease purchasing Russian oil. Focusing on Russia, the United States is leveraging tariffs on nations like India to exert pressure concerning the war in Ukraine. The potential ramifications on global markets if India and China were to halt their purchases of Russian oil are under consideration as Donald Trump intensifies sanctions loopholes that finance Moscow's war efforts. Japan is navigating a complex economic landscape with both successes and challenges. Major Japanese companies have implemented substantial pay increases, exceeding 5% for the second year running. The average raise of 5.39% marks the second largest since 1976, while public workers are set to receive their biggest pay increase in 34 years. This development is viewed favorably by the Bank of Japan, which hopes it will support stable inflation. However, Toyota reported a 37% profit drop and cut its forecast, citing tariffs imposed by the U.S. government. Analysts have identified Toyota as among the most severely affected global companies. Despite a trade deal reducing auto levies to 15%, Japanese auto giants like Toyota, Honda, and Nissan still anticipate significant profit losses. Sony, however, raised its annual profit forecasts due to strong gaming performance and a smaller-than-expected impact from U.S. trade tariffs. Automobiles and parts are Japan's biggest export to the United States, and the reduced rate has yet to be implemented. Demographically, Japan's national population on January 1st was 120.7 million. The number of foreign residents has risen 10.65% in a year, reaching 3.68 million. Japan is also focused on attracting world-class researchers to secure its future, acknowledging the need for a cultural shift to ensure policy success. Culturally, Japan is promoting tourism to less traveled destinations, encouraging travelers to explore local secrets, regional cuisine, and specialty gifts. The country is also adapting to climate change by rescheduling the annual World Cosplay Summit in Nagoya to avoid the intense summer heat. Mark Ditham, who established Klein Ditham Architecture in 1991, has received industry recognition and awards for his innovative architectural projects in Japan. Legally and politically, overseas inheritance can pass tax-free to foreigners residing in Japan under certain conditions, a point of relevance given Japan's high inheritance tax. The opposition Sanseito Party's new requirement for pre-registration for press conferences by its leader has sparked concerns about potential infringements on freedom of the press. In other news, torrential rain continues to batter the Hokuriku region on the Sea of Japan coast, an area previously struck by an earthquake, prompting warnings of landslides, flooding, and swollen rivers. Furthermore, it has come to light that over 400 people were killed by 49 U.S. mock atomic bombs, also known as pumpkin bombs, dropped on Japan between July 20 and August 14, 1945, and efforts are underway to preserve the stories of these events. Finally, Japan's offer to accept foreign students from U.S. universities faces major stumbling blocks due to the Trump administration's crackdown on student visas. Russia's Vladimir Putin indicated that conditions for a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky are not yet suitable. However, Russian news agency RIA Novosti suggested a potential meeting between Putin and Donald Trump in the coming days. The Kremlin confirmed an agreement for a Trump-Putin meeting, specifying the venue, which would be the first summit between sitting U.S. and Russian presidents since June 2021. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval announced that Putin will soon visit India to discuss summit-level meetings and milestones in the relationship. Russia is also reportedly launching attacks on several fronts in the Republic of Moldova, which will vote in an important parliamentary election in late September. The Russian leader views direct talks with Donald Trump as essential to achieving his ultimate aims in Ukraine. In Ukraine, a 23-year-old woman survived a 9-story fall after a Russian missile struck her building in Kharkiv. A Ukrainian sniper, whose face was shattered by a Russian bomb in 2023, has returned to active duty near the front line after multiple surgeries and titanium implants. President Trump accused India of aiding Moscow's war on Ukraine by purchasing Russian energy. Turning to India, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval announced that Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit India soon to discuss summit-level meetings and milestones in the relationship between the two countries. Russia supplies approximately 45% of India's oil imports. Faced with a potential 50% tariff for purchasing Russian oil, India expressed that it is unfortunate to be punished for acting in its national interest. President Trump accused India of aiding Moscow's war on Ukraine by purchasing Russian energy, potentially derailing trade talks between India and the United States, and threatened to double India's tariffs. The United States White House disputed the Kremlin's claim that a meeting between President Donald Trump and Russia's Vladimir Putin has been agreed upon. The Kremlin stated that a Trump-Putin meeting has been agreed for the coming days, with the venue set. This summit would be the first between sitting U.S. and Russian presidents since Joe Biden met Mr. Putin in Geneva in June 2021. President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, was greeted by Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Wednesday ahead of expected talks. Steve Witkoff passed along signals from President Trump to President Vladimir Putin during his 5th visit to Russia this year. President Trump accused India of aiding Moscow's war on Ukraine by purchasing Russian energy, potentially derailing trade talks between India and the United States, and threatened to double India's tariffs. In the Republic of Moldova, Russia is reportedly attacking on several fronts as the country prepares for an important parliamentary election in late September. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has voiced his intention to control Gaza, clarifying that he does not intend a permanent occupation, even as he convened a security cabinet to discuss the full occupation of the Gaza Strip, a move that has sparked international criticism. Hostage families are protesting, fearing military action will endanger their relatives, while aid agencies warn of increased Palestinian deaths and displacement under full occupation. Polls show that most Israelis prefer a deal to end the war and release the hostages. Médecins Sans Frontières has demanded the immediate closure of Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GAF, food distribution sites, citing orchestrated killing and deionization, and reporting that 71 children were treated for gunshot wounds over 7 weeks. Adding to the pressure, over 200 writers, including prominent authors like Zadie Smith and Irvine Welsh, have signed a letter advocating for an immediate and complete boycott of Israel until adequate aid is provided to Gaza. Shifting focus to the wider Middle East, former US President Donald Trump has urged countries in the region to join the Abraham Accords. Malaysia's King Sultan Ibrahim Iskandar praised President Vladimir Putin's leadership during a state visit to Russia. This signals potentially stronger trade ties apart from U.S. influence. The U.S. tariffs are impacting both Malaysia and Russia. New sanctions against Moscow are possible due to the Ukraine invasion. Domestically, the Attorney General directed police to reopen the investigation into Zara Karina Mahathia's death. The 13-year-old was found unconscious at her school in Sabas Papar district. Her family wants a full post-mortem and inquest. They doubt the initial findings of a fall. Separately, an Indian national was caught at Kuala Lumpur airport. He tried to smuggle over 2,500 live turtles. He lacked the necessary permits. The United States is preparing to levy a 15% reciprocal tariff on a wide range of Japanese products, though the specific methodology for calculating this tariff is still under negotiation. Apple has announced an increase in its U.S. investment by $100 billion, raising its total investment commitment to $600 billion over the next 4 years. President Trump has also suggested imposing 100% tariffs on chips, a decision that could have far-reaching consequences due to the intricate and global nature of semiconductor supply chain. Furthermore, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, revealed plans to significantly expand U.S.-supported aid locations in Gaza, increasing the number from 4 to 16, with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundations overseeing operations. Meanwhile, President Trump and President Vladimir Putin of Russia are anticipated to hold a meeting soon, amidst ongoing tensions related to Ukraine. The United States has pressed Russia to commit to a ceasefire in Ukraine or risk facing new sanctions. Turning to Japan, the country is currently at odds with the United States over the calculation method for the impending 15% reciprocal tariff on its goods. Germany is seeing a boom in geothermal energy ventures fueled by the energy crisis sparked by the war in Ukraine. Local utilities and energy firms are actively exploring low-carbon heating options. A recent study suggests Germany holds vast geothermal resources, potentially meeting over a quarter of the country's heating needs. Additionally, Germany is expected to play a larger leadership role in Europe, despite past reluctance, particularly in supporting Ukraine. In economic developments, Lighten, a California-based startup, is buying German and Swedish factories that once belonged to the bankrupt Swedish battery manufacturer, Northvolt. Italy has greenlit a €13.50 billion project to build the world's longest suspension bridge, which will connect the mainland to Sicily over the Strait of Messina. The Italian government believes this road and rail link will boost job creation and economic growth. The project has faced opposition due to environmental and social concerns, coupled with its high cost. In other news from Italy, 2 waterspouts were filmed merging off the Po River Delta on the northeastern coast, caused by strong winds. South Korea is currently embroiled in potential legal turmoil as investigators pursue the arrest of Kim Keon-hee, the former First Lady and spouse of imprisoned ex-President Yoon Suk-yeol, presenting the unprecedented scenario of both a former president and First Lady facing arrest. These actions are part of special prosecutor probes launched under the administration of President Lee Jae-myung. Simultaneously, On the economic front, Trade and Oil Hanku has confirmed that South Korea will benefit from the most advantageous U.S. tariff rates on semiconductors as part of the trade agreement between Washington and Seoul, guaranteeing that Samsung and Seoul will be exempt from potentially prohibitive 100% U.S. chip. The Philippine Senate has effectively halted impeachment proceedings against Vice President Sara Duterte Carpio. A 19-4-1 Senate vote shelved the articles of impeachment. This decision followed a controversial court ruling declaring the proceedings unconstitutional. Protests occurred outside the Senate building in Manila, Davao. Duterte Carpio's party had a surprisingly strong showing in the May midterm elections. The Philippine Supreme Court will ultimately decide the impeachment's fate. Cuba is currently grappling with significant economic hardship, political tensions, and animal welfare concerns. The controversial lifestyle of Fidel Castro's grandson is generating outrage, particularly given the widespread economic struggles faced by ordinary Cubans. Political tensions remain elevated, with activists reporting detentions occurring on the anniversary of the 1994 anti-Castro protest. The government attributes this unrest to incitement by Radio Marti, a U.S.-funded news station. Furthermore, animal lovers in Old Havana are facing increasing difficulties in feeding stray cats and dogs due to the rapidly worsening economic situation. France is currently battling a massive wildfire in its southern region, specifically near Saint-Laurent-de-la-Cabrerice, close to the Spanish border. The fire has already ravaged approximately 40,000 acres of land, resulting in 1 death and 13 injuries. Prime Minister François Bayrou has described the situation as a catastrophe on an unprecedented scale, with officials warning that containment efforts will be hampered by unfavorable weather conditions. Meanwhile, in the United States, higher import taxes enacted under President Trump have come into effect, affecting trade relationships with several nations. Separately, at Fort Stewart, a sergeant opened fire, wounding 5 colleagues before being apprehended by authorities. Sudan is facing renewed scrutiny after a Guardian investigation revealed a possible massacre of more than 1,500 civilians. The alleged attack occurred in April at the Zamzam camp in North Darfur, the country's largest displacement camp. The paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, reportedly carried out the 72-hour assault. Mass executions and large-scale abductions were cited in multiple testimonies. Hundreds of civilians remain missing. The event could potentially be the second biggest war crime in Sudan's current conflict. In a separate incident, Sudan State TV announced the military's destruction of a UAA. The plane was allegedly carrying Colombian mercenaries. Responding to this, President Gustavo Petro of Colombia stated, "His government is investigating the deaths of Colombians." Army-aligned state media reported at least 40 deaths. The Sudanese Air Force targeted the Emirati aircraft as it landed at an airport in Darfur controlled by paramilitary forces. In Brazil, former President Jair Bolsonaro is now under house arrest, ordered by Justice Alexandra de Moraes for alleged violations of court orders. A Supreme Court judge later eased the terms, permitting family visits without judicial approval. Bolsonaro is appealing the order, claiming it arises from alleged failures to comply with restraining orders related to efforts to solicit interference from former U.S. President Donald Trump. Simultaneously, President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva has criticized the U.S. tariffs enacted under Trump. Lula stated he sees no point in discussing them with Trump, refusing to humiliate himself. Brazil has initiated consultations at the World Trade Organization, WTO, regarding these tariffs, which have reached 50% on some goods. Lula has also advocated for revamping the WTO to better mediate trade conflicts. Pakistan is grappling with the devastating consequences of climate change, as highlighted by recent monsoon floods. These floods displaced over 1.2 million people from the Indus River Delta in the last 2 decades. Human-caused climate change exacerbated the disaster. Downstream water flow has decreased by 80% since the 1950s. This decrease intensifies displacement. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Army Chief Munir is preparing for another visit to the US. This follows a US general's praise of Pakistan as a phenomenal partner in counter-terrorism efforts. The US also acknowledged Pakistan's contribution to regional peace. United Kingdom's Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee has voted to cut interest rates. The cut is a quarter point, bringing the rate down to 4%. This decision was driven by concerns about the UK economy. Inflation is expected to potentially rise to 4% due to rising food prices. The UK Home Office is implementing a one-in, one-out scheme for migrants arriving from France. Homelessness Minister Rasha Nara Ali is facing scrutiny due to a £700 rent increase on her property after previous tenants moved out. A disinformation campaign has spread a false story about British military officers captured in Ukraine during a Russian raid. This fabricated claim was debunked by Dadu, despite being shared by some former British lawmakers. In international relations, former US President Trump believes a meeting between himself, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky to end the war in Ukraine is promising. He acknowledged the difficulties in arranging such a meeting in the past. Donald Trump reportedly aims to meet with Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky in the coming week, a detail revealed during a call with European leaders and reported by the NIT. Meanwhile, in the European Union, Booking.com is the target of a class action lawsuit involving more than 10,000 European hotels. Hotrick, the Association of Hotels, Restaurants, and Cafes in Europe, claims that Booking.com misused its market power using best price clauses for 2 decades, thereby skewing competition in the European hotel sector. Turning to the United States, the government intends to incinerate $9.70 million in birth control products. These contraceptives were initially purchased by USAID and stored in a warehouse in Geel, Belgium, prior to the agency's defunding by the US government. The incineration process may have already commenced. Myanmar mourns the death of Umait Sui, the US-sanctioned former lieutenant general who served as figurehead leader. He was 74. Installed by the military after the February 2021 coup that ousted Aung San Suu Kyi's civilian government, Umait Sui endorsed measures extending military rule despite wielding little actual power. Thailand and Cambodia wrapped up their first General Border Committee meeting in Kuala Lumpur after 4 days, reaching an agreement to deploy ceasefire monitors. However, the 2 nations remained at an impasse regarding the status of captured soldiers. In Thailand, a Singaporean tourist, Go, aged 44, found himself in legal trouble in Pattaya. He was arrested for operating a drone over Walking Street without the required permit. This action violated a nationwide drone ban, reportedly linked to the existing Thai-Cambodian border tensions. In the United States, a shooting at Fort Stewart Army Airfield near Savannah, Georgia, resulted in 5 officers being wounded. Sergeant Cornelius Radford is accused of using a personal handgun in the attack. 6 soldiers received medals for their actions in subduing Radford. Fortunately, 3 of the injured soldiers have been discharged from the hospital. Mexico is partnering with the Dominican Republic to mitigate the escalating sargassum blooms in the Atlantic. These blooms are fueled by nutrient pollution, deforestation, rising ocean temperatures, and changing sea current. In separate news, around 300 migrants have begun traveling north from southern Mexico, aiming for destinations other than the U.S. border. Swida, Syria, is currently observing a tense truce after weeks of sectarian clashes. The violence, which extended beyond the city limits, has heightened fears of renewed attacks against religious minorities in the region. The situation remains fragile, with the potential for further escalation. Indonesia is seeing increased efforts to protect the endangered leopard sharks in the Raja Ampat Islands. President Prabowo Subianto recently issued pardons for 2 formerly high-profile politicians convicted on corruption charges. The pardons, framed as promoting national unity, have sparked controversy and accusations of undermining judicial independence, particularly given these individuals were once opponents of Prabowo's coalition. The parliament swiftly endorsed the presidential decision. Ghana experienced a tragic helicopter crash that claimed the lives of 8 individuals, including high-ranking government officials. Among the deceased were the defense minister, the environment minister, the vice chair of the National Democratic Congress ruling party, and a senior national security advisor, along with the helicopter's crew. Ireland recently marked the 250th anniversary of Daniel O'Connell's birth, a pivotal figure known as the Liberator of Ireland. Speeches and ceremonies honored his legacy. The commemoration also reignited interest in the enduring mystery of O'Connell's missing heart. O'Connell had requested that, upon his death, his body be returned to Ireland, while his heart should be sent to Rome. The heart disappeared from a college in Rome, and its location remains unknown. Tonga faces scrutiny regarding rugby contracts. A former captain voiced concerns about Super Rugby potentially restricting Pacifica players. He urged enforcement of rules allowing players to represent their home nations in international rugby. In other news, Tonga solidified its involvement in deep-sea mining. The metals company announced an updated agreement with Tonga Offshore Mining Limited. This agreement reinforces Tonga's position in the controversial industry. The United States is seeing Democrats raising alarms about former President Donald Trump's alleged plan to redirect funds earmarked for the nation's nuclear arsenal. The goal is reportedly to finance the conversion of a luxury Boeing 747-8 jet, gifted by the Qatari royal family, into a new air force. This conversion could cost taxpayers an estimated $1 billion. The jet itself was valued at $400 million in dollar. Understood. Please provide the news articles. I am ready to begin crafting the summaries according to your specified guidelines. Australia witnessed a notable surge in its housing market, with city home prices climbing by around $85,000 over 3 years. Turning to Canada, a contrasting trend emerged as home prices declined by $150,000 during the same period. This drop has made the median Canadian home nearly 20% cheaper than its value in early 2022. Democratic Republic of Congo is facing a dire situation as the United Nations has reported that Rwanda-backed rebels have killed at least 319 civilians in the eastern part of the country during the last month, exacerbating the already volatile security situation. Rwanda is under scrutiny as the UN reports rebels that allegedly backs are responsible for the deaths of hundreds of civilians in neighboring Congo. In a separate, positive development, Robin Roberts visited Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park, highlighting conservation efforts surrounding the endangered mountain gorillas, whose global population is estimated to be around 8,000. New Zealand is set to phase out the National Certificate of Educational Achievement, NCA, the country's official secondary school qualification for over 2 decades, by 2030. Simultaneously, Earth Sciences New Zealand reported 34 earthquakes this week, with the epicenter located 15 a.m. west of Castle Point in the lower North Island. Poland has a new president, Karol Nawrocki, whose campaign received support from Donald Trump. This election signals a possible move towards more nationalistic policies and governance within Poland. Afghanistan is seeing a rise in madrasa enrollment driven by shortcomings in the country's educational infrastructure. One school has seen its numbers jump from 35 to 160 students in 5 years. In Argentina, Javier Milei's leadership capabilities are being questioned, particularly regarding his controversial economic strategies, including the sale of human organs. Shifting to Australia, the South African team is confident after winning the World Test Championship final as they prepare for a white ball tour against Australia, who are seeking revenge for their previous defeat. Denmark's Aalborg Zoo is asking people to donate unwanted pets, like chickens and rabbits, to be euthanized and fed to the zoo's carnivorous animals. Greece is investing in an anti-drone system as part of a €30 billion armed forces modernization plan slated for 2036, aiming to mass produce both drones and anti-drone technology. Tragically, in Kenya, an air ambulance crashed in a residential area near Nairobi, resulting in at least 6 deaths. The Lebanese army reported the successful killing of 3 of the country's most wanted drug traffickers, who were also connected to the deaths of soldiers. For the Marshall Islands, fisheries and marine resources are essential to the island's economy, health, and cultural heritage. This was recently emphasized at a fisheries conservation and sustainability seminar. In Nigeria, more than a third of the population lacks access to electricity, and those with grid connections frequently experience unreliable service. Palau is supporting the Solomon Islands' choice to postpone Pacific Islands Forum partner discussions until 2026, allowing the Forum to concentrate on vital regional matters at this year's assembly. The Solomon Islands government is working to increase the legal marriage age to 18, addressing the fact that around 6% of girls are married before turning 15. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, a significant 39% tariff imposed by the United States on imports from Switzerland has raised eyebrows because their significant gold refining operations distort trade data, even though it is not a source of cheap goods to the earth. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.